Welcome to episode 330 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. In this episode, we're joined by Kate Muth, Executive Director at IMAG. She's going to update us on some of the latest developments in international mail. Joining me on the line is Kate Muth. Kate is Executive Director at IMAG, International Mailers Advisory Group. Got that right, haven't I, Kate? Now, Kate, before we get stuck into things, I've got to mention straight off the bat, Kate, you've just been bestowed with a great honour. You've been awarded the Megan J. Brennan Award. Can you just tell everybody quickly what it is and, well, any, do you want to thank anyone? This is not your acceptance speech.
I have not yet written my acceptance speech, but no, thank you very much. It is, it's an annual award given by the Women in Logistics and Delivery Services, WILDS, which I've been a long-time member, and it recognizes sort of leadership, I guess, in the industry, and it's an enormous honor for me. And we'll have a luncheon in January when they'll actually present the award. So I'll have fine-tuned my acceptance speech then, but I am enormously honored, and just to have my name linked with Megan Brennan, who was the first female Postmaster General of the United States, and the past winners is just it's just very humbling and very rewarding.
And we've had a previous winner on the podcast, in fact, episode 300, everybody, the USPS OIG. Tammy Wickham Hull was our guest in episode 300. She's the reigning.
Yeah, she's the reigning Megan Brennan Award winner. But I'll look forward to being a part of that awards reception, and I'll thank all the right people at that time. So thank you for noticing, though. Thank you for mentioning. I often
wonder if these things, it's a bit like the Masters, where everybody gets a green jacket, or when you're a 5-time host of Saturday Night Live, you get a special jacket. Anyway. So
yeah, I can't wait to get the jacket. That's going to be awesome.
The jacket. Now, we're going to talk about international mail, Kate. We'll sort of break this up into two parts. We'll talk about inbound and outbound. We have a bit of a US focus because you're based in the USA. But let's start with international mail into the USA. There's been some talk about the de minimis threshold in the USA. What's all that about?
Yes, right. So a lot of activity and policy discussion around perhaps lowering the de minimis threshold into the United States, which is quite high at $800, or at least high in comparison to other countries, and the movement around the world to sort of lower the low value threshold or eliminate it altogether, either for value added tax purposes or for collection of duties. But here in the U.S., that's gotten a lot of attention lately. There's been some movement among lawmakers to try to reduce the threshold or at least float some legislation. But actually, just late last week, one of the key senators that's been working on customs modernization, Senator Cassidy out of Louisiana, along with Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island, introduced what they're calling the Customs Modernization Act of 2023, which is an effort to try to kind of give Customs and Border Protection the tools they need for, especially around enforcement, and trying to give them the tools they need for the modern era of cross-border trade and global trade and the boom in e-commerce. But in that bill, long way of saying the de minimis level remains at $800. So at least in this first major piece of reform legislation of customs, the de minimis level stays at $800. But one thing to keep in mind, especially the way the U.S. legislative process works, which I know you've heard is a lot like sausage making, but this really gives sort of an opportunity for discussions around customs modernization. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the elements of other bills, such as the threshold, the $800 threshold, gets looked at and considered, or perhaps some activity around the STOP Act 2.0, kind of beefing up the STOP Act. Some of those things could work their way into this other bill as it plays out, of course, over the course of the next year or two. So that's one other thing just to mention, is that as we go into an election year in 2024, which is both a presidential and congressional elections, a lot of sort of big ticket policy or legislative activity probably will not be seen to fruition. It'll probably just be pushed into 2025.
You mentioned Stop Act 2.0, and if my memory serves me correctly, we did discuss that in our podcast earlier in 2023. What's the current status there? Is that are there changes being made, or where are we at with that?
Yeah, that one is interesting because it got introduced, as you noted, earlier in 2023, and we did talk a little bit about it. And it really tries to put a little more teeth into the STOP Act. There are a few pieces around the legislation, which of course requires 100% EAD for mail coming into the U.S. But a number of countries have gotten exemptions. The law does allow for some exemptions for certain reasons. But there was a rather critical Office of Inspector General report. This is not the USPS OIG, but the Department of Homeland Security, that found a lot of weaknesses in enforcement of the current act. So the STOP Act 2.0 is sort of getting a renewed attention, and the bill itself has not moved and hasn't, I don't even think it's gotten a hearing. So that's why I think a lot of folks had this sense that the legislation that looks at the STOP Act, at the de minimis, it'll probably get a little more scrutiny, and those issues will be part of this larger customs reform or Customs Modernization Act that, as I said, introduced last week, but Congress goes on recess, I think, at the end of this week. So it really is everything kind of teeing up everything for a look in early 2024.
Is it still a really hot political issue in the US? When I say is it a hot political issue, what I mean is things like, the issues that the STOP Act was trying to address. So synthetic drugs in the mail, counterfeit goods in the mail, and things like that. Is that still very, very a hot topic in domestic US politics? Because obviously that's what's driving this change, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, those are huge issues. The opioid crisis in the United States is not improved. It's not gotten any better. There's forced labor as an issue. Counterfeit is a big issue. So I think what these members of Congress, and it's a bipartisan issue, and one that's being addressed in a very bipartisan manner, because we're such a polarized atmosphere here around legislation. So that's why some of these issues are getting legs. But I don't think the STOP Act, as a tool for fighting opioids in the mail, I think it's done a good job already, but the vast majority of opioids comes across the southern ports of entry. So is it still needed? Is there tightening up needed in the STOP Act? Yes, probably. The exemptions piece is a big deal. You don't want transshipments going through countries that have an exemption. I do think customs reform and modernization is needed, because you do have you have this huge amount of e-commerce coming into the country, but maybe some of the tools that CBP has are a little bit dated, or we could use technology better. We could use AI tools and things like that. But you also have, some of these issues around counterfeit and forced labor probably need broader tools as well. You have to rely on the marketplaces and the platforms to do a bit more. It can't just be on the carriers that bring things in. And the forced labor issue goes far beyond just, what's coming through cross-border trade.
And I guess from the conversations I've had on the podcast and privately over the last 12 months, there's a sense that e-commerce or cross-border e-commerce trade is generally a good thing, that we want to make sure that the tools are there for customs to be able to facilitate trade rather than block trade or unwittingly create bottlenecks, I suppose.
Absolutely. And
I'm not trying to bash customs or anything. I'm just saying.
No, you're absolutely right, because I think that's one thing that's, sort of lost, is how much comes in through what we call the de minimis channel. It's something like 685 million pieces came in 2022 through the de minimis channel, through what we call Section 321 imports. That's something like, I think CBP says that's something like 85% of all imports. So this is huge amount coming in. And we're all about, as an industry, trade facilitation, of course. And I think that's one of the things in this current customs modernization, in the current piece of legislation. It's a little heavy on enforcement, and it doesn't favor trade facilitation quite so much. And that's one of the things that we've also talked about around the de minimis level. I think the average price of what comes in through, or the average value of what comes in through the de minimis channel is something like $55. So if you, and I might be off a little bit on that, but I think it's like $55. It's well under that $800. And CBP has such limited resources, as we talked about, or I referenced a little bit. There's so much going on at the borders. We really need to figure out how best to use those limited resources. And so I think raising the de minimis threshold isn't actually the solution. It's perhaps using some of these more modern tools and technology.
Let's move to outbound issues now. What's happening on that side of e-commerce and parcel shipping from a US perspective?
Yeah, on the outbound side, we continue to, it feels like we had this conversation because it seems like it's been going on for a year or two, is still, when will we see real enforcement of the EU's ICS2 Release 2? I know there's a lot of outstanding issues around transit mail and transshipment mail, and I know that's sort of been pushed out to April of 2024 in terms of trying to get that enforcement up and running. But we're sort of curious as to where are the member states in terms of enforcing, mail that's outside of the EU, destinating in EU countries. Our folks, my members, have been providing the HS codes as required. They've been doing what's necessary in terms of the advanced data. And I know the Postal Service, at least from a mail perspective, is providing the necessary data to the airlines. We're just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop on when and what enforcement might look like in individual member states. We're also paying attention to what's going on in Brazil with their Remessa Conforme program, which is their new e-commerce compliance program, which I think from both a mail and an express carrier environment is fairly well received, trying to level the playing field there, having the same standards, whether it comes in commercially or through the postal channel, and then having a registration and certification process for online retailers and marketplaces. I think there's 6 or so marketplaces that have been certified through Remessa Conforme. So we're sort of still learning a lot about that one. And then, of course, we're trying to pay attention to what's going on in other parts of the world, like Indonesia, which has just instituted some regulations around having a floor, at least on what the sort of social media platforms can sell online. So there's a lot going on, a lot to pay attention to. There's some things going on in Canada around their CARM program, which is a business-to-business shipments. So a lot going on, a lot to pay attention to. And, during peak season, it's not always easy to kind of keep up on everything when you're just trying to get the mail out the door every day.
And one of the interesting things as well out of all of this is that the e-commerce shopper sitting, in the pajamas late at night shopping online, they're unaware of all of this. They might not know where their consignment is coming from or where it was manufactured or anything like that. And yet we in the postal and the broader delivery sector have to somehow put all these pieces together so that the item is able to, cross borders seamlessly, don't we?
Yeah, seamlessly. That's the key, right? And I think that's one of the things that we've seen over the last few years is, it's been a key issue for years, but really, really important over the last few years is visibility and being able to track the piece end to end. Because as you said, a lot of people, and myself included, I order something and it's coming from another country. I just, I want it to meet the window that it says it will arrive. I maybe order something from the UK. I don't expect it in 2 days, but if it says 6 days, that's what I'm counting on. And I want to be able to see it every step of the process. So you're right. The recipient, the person who orders online doesn't know all, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, what's going on behind the curtain, right? So it's up to the solutions providers, the shippers and their service providers to ensure that it's seamless. And that's not easy to do. And I'm, I even in this logistics world that we're in, it's really amazing how well so many of these providers do it.
You also mentioned AED or EAD, whichever it is. Will we one day have international agreement on which abbreviation to use?
When we switch to the metric system, maybe we will have that agreement. But so I don't think it's going to happen. But I know what you mean. We can say EAD for your wider audience.
Kate's just trying to trigger me by mentioning the USA's lack of metric system. It's just something that inexplicably grinds my gears. Anyway, with regard to AED or EAD or whatever we'd like to call it, are there ways in which or areas where the compliance can be significantly improved? I mean, are there some easy gains that we can make? as an effort to improve the reliability of the postal service, to make international delivery safer, and to reduce the transport of illicit and illegal substances?
Yeah, it is challenging because you always are going to have, I think, countries or posts that are lagging behind or a little behind or don't have the technological capability. And we also have some differences in, I don't want to say in standards, but you have the global postal model, which the UPU, is under the UPU umbrella. And then you have other countries or regions doing something a little bit beyond that, like the EU. So it's difficult if countries haven't even caught up to the global postal model, and now you're asking for something even beyond that. But I think the key really is to ensure whatever percent, the big countries, the ones that are doing the most cross-border mail, I think we have to get them as close to 100% as possible. And then we're in good shape. Because, if you have a small country that's not doing a whole lot of cross-border, obviously you still want to have full EAD and you want to have full visibility. But really the key thing is to ensure that where the bulk of the cross-border activity is happening is where we're getting that 100% compliance. But again, it is difficult if you have different models and you're trying to still catch up to, I don't want to say the lesser model, but the not as advanced model. That's just difficult. It's difficult for users of the system, and it's difficult for the designated operators.
Kate, if people want to find out more about IMAG and what you do there, and indeed about Wilds, and if you're interested in joining Wilds or supporting Wilds, where should people go? Who should they contact?
You can find IMAG at www.imag.world online. You can find me on LinkedIn and reach out that way, and I'm happy to have a conversation. We'll also have our winter member meeting tied to the World Mail Express Americas in Miami in February. Wilds, you can find more at shedelivers.org, or you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you to the right people at Wilds.
I'll stick a link to all of those things on the episode page on thepostalhub.com. So if you're not listening to this already on thepostalhub.com, just go over there, find the episode page, and you'll find all those links. Kate Muth, Executive Director at IMAG, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Mustafa Tonguç, he's the Managing Director Germany at DHL Express, joins us to talk about resilience and about B2B e-commerce and a few other things. And we've also got an interesting episode coming up soon talking about parcel lockers. Make sure you catch all of these episodes. How do you do it? Well, just by sheer chance, I suppose. A better way is to subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast platform like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or whatever. You can subscribe to my email newsletters. Just go over to thepostalhub.com and there's some stuff there, some newsletters you can subscribe to brighten up your email inbox. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, you can do that. You can follow me. You can follow the Postal Hub on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, or whatever it's called this week, but I don't know. Do you care? Ponder that one. If you want to email me about anything at all, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.